All right, this is the Roaring 20's Part 2. We left off last time discussing the Red Scare. There was a huge fear in America at this point that the same thing that happened in Russia could happen to the United States. So we see people taking precautions so this may or won't happen in the United States. Unfortunately, that meant a lot of problems and a lot of discrimination against foreigners. Okay, we have there was actually a bomb that went off on Wall Street in September in 1920. 38 people died, and of course the communists are going to be blamed for this, and foreigners, and they'll use that as an excuse to deport many foreigners. America's called for known communists, socialists, and anarchists to be jailed or even driven out. Okay, thousands were arrested, and some just because they were foreigners. Some of them were legit, but more than 500 immigrants were deported during this time. It was popular at first. In fact, Army's chief of staff said at one point they should be deported on ships of stone with sails of lead. A popular preacher even suggested a firing squad so they would save money on the deportation costs. So we'll see that obviously kind of ease up. But those were some of the feelings from the time. So very intense and a scary time in America. Now, the election of 1920, we'll see Warren Harding of Ohio, another Ohio man, versus James M. Cox, also from Ohio. And you drive down National Road, the airport is actually named after James M. Cox. If you didn't know that, check out the sign next time you go by. The Democrats were blamed for the troubles that were going on after World War I. So James M. Cox was already at a disadvantage. They were getting blamed for the problems, unemployment, Red Scare, and that's what happens in politics. Harding's main goal was to get back to normalcy. Let's get back to the way things were as the Red Scare and the labor strikes subside. And obviously, you probably haven't heard of James M. Cox except for the airport, but you have heard of Warren G. Harding, so you know who's going to win. Okay. His background: born in 1865. In Corsica, Ohio. Worked for his father's newspaper. Liked the public exposure, liked being in front of people. Did not like the farm chores of living in a rural town. He liked to go into town and be in front of people and discuss and talk about things. In 1879, he goes to college. His mother actually wanted him to become a minister, so he attended Ohio Central College, which was a ministry school. He didn't like that part of it, but he did like school, okay, and was very active in school with the debate club, editor of the yearbook. He worked many jobs during this time, including construction, railroad. He became a teacher in 1882, but resigned. He actually said at one point that this was the hardest job of all, and resigned soon thereafter. Tried law, quit. Tried selling insurance, quit. And then finally found his love, which were the newspapers. Okay, in 1884, he bought a newspaper, and it was called the Marion Star at the time. With a $300 loan, he is able to purchase the Star. In the 1890s, he marries Florence, Big Flo. There she is, Big Flo. He was 26. She was 37 when they got married. Cougar. She had a lot of money. Okay, and I hate to say this, but that marriage was more of an arrangement than anything else. Love, maybe liking each other's company, was about as strong as it can get. She practically took over the business, handled the raises, the payroll, and his favorite thing to do was to play cards, and that'll come into play later. He got into politics with the Republicans and became a state senator. Ran for governor twice, but lost. In 1914, he runs for U.S. Senate. This time he wins. Didn't care too much for the work behind it, but he liked making his public appearances, racetracks, golf courses, baseball games, etc. Not the best senator, average at best. Often took trips to New York, and later we find out that there was a reason while he was making many trips to New York. There was a girl there. Her name was Nan Britton. Nan Britton. She was 30 years younger than he was. They were old acquaintances at one point, and yeah, there was actually an illegitimate child with this, and their child was born in 1919. Big Flo had an idea that something was going on and actually hired a private investigator. Too late, though. Nan was already pregnant, and however, this thing really won't break out because obviously, especially back in the day, you would think that would ruin somebody's reputation, but he becomes president in 1920. Actually was almost going to withdraw, but Big Flo wouldn't let him, and he ends up winning. Basically because of how bad things were going for the Democrats that were in office, with Wilson being there. So, kind of wins there. Now, here is first president to visit Alaska, first to ride in the inauguration in his car. We see him. This is called the Ohio Gang. This is his group of his cabinet members. They called them the Ohio Gang or the Poker Cabinet. Some other names there. His vice president was John Calvin Coolidge. We talked about Coolidge already. And so lots of scandals, hence why they are in this getup. The Ohio Gang weren't the best advisors, and we'll see that in a second. Now, the problems during his presidency, veteran concerns. You know, how the government should provide compensation for these World War I veterans, you know, jobs and things like that. So the Veterans Bureau, 1921, is created to handle these needs. Okay, today it's called the Veterans Administration, or the VA. Might have heard that before. Hospitalization, compensation. According to the veterans, that's still not enough. They wanted more of compensation. So in 1922, the bonus bill would be passed by Congress and would give veterans more money. Harding will veto this bill. Basically because inside the bill it didn't say how they're going to pay for it. So this is going to be a problem. And remember the bonus bill. We'll talk about the bonus army later. But that will pop up again. So that's an issue that's hanging over his head. It makes him look bad to the servicemen. 1924, Congress passes it over his head. They pass it with a 2/3 vote in both houses. They pass it in the form of insurance policy. They get $1 a day for their service, $1.25 for anything overseas service. Tariff Act is also passed, raised tariffs. And so, once again, they pass it over his head anyway. Problem is, like we said, there really wasn't a way to handle it. Now, the scandals. His bad advisors, the Ohio Gang. Harding's administration contained many able men, including Herbert Hoover, future president, Charles Hughes, Secretary of State, but there are also many that he chose who were old friends, old poker buddies, who were dishonest and greedy, and once again, more of taking advantage of him than anything. There was so much stealing and briberies and things like that that they were nicknamed the Ohio Gang. Okay, and basically because he was so naive. One example: Charles Forbes was a director of the Veterans Bureau that was created. He actually deserted the army and pocketed lots of almost $200 million from surplus sales. So not the best pick there. Attorney General Daugherty had protected many from the Prohibition Amendment for a fee. That's one scandal. The biggest one is the Teapot Dome scandal. We'll actually see our first cabinet member be sentenced to prison. His name was Albert Fall, because of some insider, basically information that gets out. Fall was had the Secretary of Navy transfer the Navy's oil reserves to his department, and then Albert Fall leased this area called the Teapot Dome, which was actually it's a place in Wyoming, Teapot Dome, Wyoming, and his friends could use that oil, and Fall gets rich from it. So it became a disaster, and like I said, our first cabinet member to be sentenced to prison. Not very good. Secretary of the Navy at the time was Edwin Denby. He was also part of this thing. So that was the biggest one. And the big hearing, it's public news, it's all over the newspapers, and it's just not good. They tried to deny it. August 2nd, 1923, Harding dies. Okay? Now, even today, there's still lots of rumors about this, what happened. He was on a tour of Alaska and the Pacific coast. His administration was getting pretty ugly. When the train reached San Francisco coming back, the public was told the president was ill. He had a stomach problem. He had pneumonia. He was getting better. He had a stroke. And all of a sudden, boom, the president's dead. Okay, the trip was pretty different for him. He did not take his buddies with him. He usually took all his drinking and card-playing buddies with him. He had a will drawn right before he left. He fell ill in San Francisco, and 2 doctors were called in, but apparently they were never allowed to treat him. The only person that saw him was his old personal physician from back home in Ohio, good old Doc Sawyer, who really wasn't even a doctor. And Mrs. Harding was alone with him in the room when he died. Okay, and she did not allow an autopsy. Is there more to his death? The truth is, we'll never know. They did find some traces of arsenic in his system when they did some more testing later down the road, but back then that was actually pretty common because arsenic was actually used in parts of medicine. So it's not clear. Frankly, we may never know. Did Mrs. Harding, was she still upset about the Nan Britton? I don't know. Makes you think, though. So Calvin Coolidge becomes president, sworn in after Harding's death. Calvin Coolidge, dull, quiet, let's just say it, boring. Okay? However, probably a good man for the job, because after Harding's scandal-filled presidency, this might be something we needed. Okay? He was former governor of Massachusetts. We talked about that. We talked about his role in the police strike. He was very conservative. Government should encourage, not regulate businesses. There should be no special legislation to help farmers and workers. God helps those who help themselves. So he was more of a laissez-faire type person, and that's what he believed his government role should be. Well, he finishes out and wins the 1924 election against J.W. Davis. Davis brought out the corruption that occurred in the Harding administration, which he obviously was part of, as far as Coolidge goes. But Coolidge comes back and says, well, we maintained our prosperity, didn't we? And, it was right. Keep cool with Coolidge was his motto. And as we know, it obviously works out. So Coolidge will win, okay? Other information on Coolidge, he was went to bed early, like I said, kind of boring. Wouldn't even tell his wife of social functions. They kind of had led separate lives. When asked for a list of these functions, he told his wife, "We don't give out that information." Cared about his wife, but didn't show it very well. He does not decide in the 28 election. Decides not to run again. Still very popular because he cut government spending, lowered taxes, and held the country together after all the scandals and losing a president in midterm. But he had enough. Now, some interesting things about Calvin Coolidge that you would never guess. He loved to take pictures. He loved to be photographed in an Indian headdress, which is why he's wearing this in his cartoon. This is an actual picture. Not sure why. Also liked to be photographed in his Boy Scout uniform. He's on the Spirit of St. Louis here because that is when that plane made its daring trip across the Atlantic. He's got a couple pets here. Pet raccoon. Also had a donkey named Ebenezer. So, although it seemed boring, there's something up with this headdress. So, all right, that is all today. We will continue later. Stay classy, Vandalia.